My name is Dan Stryker, and this video is in association with the Territory Project at theterritoryproject.com. I'm going to be talking very fast and paraphrasing because there's a lot of valuable information in here and I want you to have access to it all. What I would suggest is listen to it once and then go back through the slides because I might not be able to mention everything that's going on in the slides. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is fight or flight, right? It's the idea of amygdala hijack. Your amygdala hijack is your snake brain thinking, right? So the idea is, when you get into a conflict, you either want to run or you want to stand and fight. Now, the thing I'd invite you to look at is, especially in America, we have this idea that if you fight, you're courageous, and if you run, you're a coward. That the action itself does not determine whether it's good or bad. It's the context of the situation that determines the appropriate course of action. So there are plenty of times where the right thing to do is fight, and there are plenty of times where the right thing to do is to take off and run. So I would simply invite you to look at the context rather than the action itself. Right, so an amygdala hijack, the reason why it's there is the backup function in the brain for survival. So if you touch a hot stove and you yank your hand away, right, that's an amygdala hijack. If you get very anxious in terms of conflict, right, and you want to just leave the room, again, that's an amygdala hijack. You're not necessarily thinking rationally, you're thinking emotionally. These emotional or irrational thoughts, right, tend to have you say something that you regret later or make decisions that you wish you hadn't made, right? So here are the 5 most common techniques for conflict resolution. This was put together by 2 guys in the 1970s, right? And basically it's competitive, collaborative, compromising, accommodating, and avoiding, right? So competitive is, you draw from position, rank, or expertise. Collaborative is you're willing to work together with other people. Compromising is you'll work together with other people, but everybody has to relinquish something. Accommodating is that you will, give in to others, but you also tend to give in stuff that you don't need to. And avoiding is, obviously delegating decisions, accepting default decisions, and not wanting to hurt anybody's feelings. So, one of the things that I would suggest that you look at is I've found that most people are a combination of all of these, and they have different strengths and weaknesses to all of these. So for example, you could take all 5, put them on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the strongest, and how would you rank them? I don't think anybody would rank them at a 0, right? So for me, competitive is very high, collaborative is very high, compromising and accommodating is very low, and avoiding is pretty high. So that's the way I would rank myself. So I'd invite you to look at the same thing. Now, there's 5 common challenges, obviously, with conflict, right? And that's, that is possibly more than just a disagreement. Okay, so it's not where are we going for dinner tonight. That's not necessarily a conflict. A conflict is where there's a perceived threat, real or otherwise. Conflicts may continue to fester when ignored, right? So this is the idea. You see somebody in the grocery store that you haven't seen for 3 years, and immediately you're right back in the situation, and you're hot and mad simply because the conflict didn't get resolved, and that was the last time you spoke to that person. We respond to conflicts based on our perceptions of the situation, not necessarily an objective review of the facts. So if you've ever watched 2 people argue with each other, right, it's the idea that you will see a whole lot more than they will, given that they're in it. Right, so consider that if you're in a conflict, you might not be seeing the entire situation. Right, conflicts trigger strong emotions. Right, so if you're capable, if you're able to manage your emotions in time of stress, you'll be more successful rather than less. Your ability to know yourself and manage your emotions becomes important, right? And conflicts are obviously an opportunity for growth, right? So this is the idea. I'm sure you've had an argument with somebody, and when you're done, you actually feel more connected to that person rather than less, right? And it's that idea where 2 people are friends because they've had such a strong argument with each other over something, right? And they now have a certain level of respect for each other. Now, one of the things, the better you understand yourself, the better your ability to deal with conflict. Right, it's just the fact of the matter, right? So one of the things you want to know is, do your feelings flow, right? Do they go from one to the next, right? So does it start at annoyed to aggravated to angry to fury, and follow a certain flow, and is that flow consistent? Are my emotions accompanied by physical sensations, right? So what I found is that you get a tightness in your chest or a pit in your stomach, that actually tends to precede the conflict rather than be afterwards. So meaning you'll have a reaction, then you'll say, I'm either in a conflict, or I'm mad, or my survival is being threatened, or whatever it is, right? And then you will act after that, but the physical sensations tend to come first. Now there's this idea between discrete feelings and intense feelings, right? So discrete feelings are like little facial expressions that you have. Do you wear your heart on your sleeve, right? Intense feelings are feelings that's strong enough to capture the attention of the person you want, but also other people, right? So if you, for example, yell in a restaurant, you're going to get other people's attention, right? And then do I pay attention to my emotions, and do they factor into decision making? Basically what that points out to is, are you rational in your decision making, or do you let your emotions take over and tend to be a little bit irrational when you get into conflict? Now, 6 tips, right? First one is listen for what is felt as well as said. In my opinion, you can't listen without doing this, meaning if you're only listening to the words that are coming out of somebody's mouth, it's very difficult to successfully resolve conflict. You have facial expression, tone of voice, body language, and what's being said, and all of those factor into a total communication. That's what you want to be listening for, not simply the words that are coming out of their mouth, right? Make conflict resolution a priority rather than winning or being right. And the idea is, when you're out to win, when you're out to be right. Winning is fun, being right is fun. And what I would suggest is that if you're in a conflict and you recognize that you want to win it, or you're continuing because you want to be right, I would just invite you to recognize that for what it is, because you would let it go much sooner than you normally would. Focus on the present, right? So again, what is going to be your ability to have a conversation with that person you saw 3 years ago in the grocery store if you're still living as if that argument is occurring, right? Because the fact of the matter is the argument hasn't occurred for 3 years, right? So focus on being present focused rather than focusing on the past. And again, that's one of those situations where you'll tend to bring up old stuff, remember whens and that sort of thing, and throw them into a conversation that really doesn't belong. Pick your battles, right? This is an important one. Everybody says it a lot, right? But here's the idea. It's not pick your battles. It's that battles are going to pick you. You're going to have certain conflicts that you're just not going to be able to avoid. You're not going to be able to get away from, and those take time and energy. So if you do have a conflict where you can either choose to engage or not engage, I would suggest that you do that based on the time and energy involved in that argument or disagreement or whatever it is. Because quite frankly, given that certain battles are going to pick you, it might not be worth it, right? And then be willing to forgive, okay? So, if you're not willing to forgive, you're going to hold on to a lot of stuff. And it's this idea of, generally people don't forgive because they want to punish the other person, right? That is the idea of if you were to swallow the poison and want the other person to get sick, right? So, be willing to forgive and to let stuff go, right? If you can't, this idea of agree to disagree, everybody's heard that cliche before, but here's really how it works, right? Notice the guys on the bottom. If the guy in the red let go, all the guys in white would fall, right? So, in order to remain in a conflict, remain in disagreement, to continue fighting, there needs to be resistance. If there's no resistance, there's no conflict, right? So by letting go, that can, dissolve the conflict right there. All right, again, my name is Dan Stryker. I thank you for your attention. I know I went really fast, so you're welcome to review the video. You're also welcome to check out theterritoryproject.com and check us out at facebook.com/theterritoryproject. Thanks again for checking out our video, and we'll talk to you soon.